Am I the asshole for embarrassing my husband in front of his parents? My husband's parents visited us in the US for the first time in several years. They traveled all the way from Central America, and since we've been married for less than a year, this was my first time meeting them. I only found out about their visit when my mother-in-law called to ask what I wanted her to bring from their country. My husband had mentioned nothing about their pending arrival before that call, and even after, he was vague about their plans. He wouldn't agree to any of my suggestions or even tell me the exact time their plane would land, thus the day. Their arrival was late at night, so our initial meeting was brief, but it went fine. We met again a few days later, and although his parents were pleasant, my husband seemed distant. He barely spoke, didn't appear excited to see them, and, surprisingly, didn't take any time off work during their visit, even after they mentioned it would be years before they could return. This struck me as odd, considering he had always spoken of having a good relationship with his family. My work schedule is erratic, mostly night shifts, so I need to plan things carefully. I suggested we all have dinner at a nice restaurant on a specific date, and my husband agreed. The day came, and we met his parents, brother, and grandfather at a restaurant my husband and I enjoy. However, I quickly sensed that his family felt out of place. The restaurant was upscale, much fancier than anything available in their rural hometown, and we were seated in a dimly lit area where they struggled to read the menus, which were entirely in English. Neither my husband nor his brother offered to help their parents or grandfather navigate the unfamiliar dishes. Our server spoke very little Spanish, and although I asked my husband to help communicate with her, he did nothing. He has a habit of not letting me order for us when we dine out, which is an issue on its own, but this time, it was especially frustrating. After the server passed him by 3 times, I took matters into my own hands, asked the questions, helped everyone with their orders, and tried to engage his family in conversation. But aside from his parents and me, the table was silent. My husband even started texting me during dinner, telling me to stop talking, which I didn't notice until afterward because I keep my phone in my purse during meals. I was shocked and hurt by his behavior. I wasn't being rude or inappropriate. I genuinely wanted to get to know my in-laws and have them get to know me. Yet, my husband was clearly upset, rushing everyone out as soon as the bill was paid. We left, and I never saw his parents again before they flew home. On the drive back, I saw the message he had sent during dinner, and I couldn't hold back my tears. It broke my heart. Instead of addressing his frustration with me directly, he punished everyone at the table with his silence. When we got home, he exploded, accusing me of trying to be the center of attention and overstepping by helping with the orders. He said his family could have managed on their own, and berated me for making him feel like he has to pretend we have more money than we do. He also admitted he didn't want to go to that restaurant, even though it's one of his favorites, and he usually insists we dine there. I tried to explain that I was just trying to be helpful, since neither he nor his brother offered any assistance. But he dismissed my intentions and accused me of manipulation. I hardly spoke about myself during dinner. My focus was on learning more about his parents. I also pointed out that if he felt the restaurant wasn't appropriate, he should have communicated that to me. I only suggested it because he always raves about the food, and although it's on the pricier side, it's his go-to spot. There have been other incidents where his insecurities surface, and whenever I try to address them, he accuses me of trying to manipulate him. I'm genuinely concerned about how his parents now view me and our relationship. He spent most of their visit seeing them alone after work, including me entirely. I thought I was being polite, social, and helpful, but now I'm questioning everything. Am I missing something here, or was I truly out of line?
Our next story is, am I the asshole boarding the plane and leaving without my wife? My wife, Meg, 43F, and I, 47M, a 21-year-old daughter, Jess, who attends college out of state. Jess is currently in her junior year and stayed on campus over the summer for a university job. Once the summer ended, she moved out of the dorms and into an off-campus apartment. We live in the Pacific Northwest, PNW, while Jess attends school on the East Coast. We typically visit her a couple of times each semester, usually for parents' weekend and move-out day, and she comes home during the holidays. I'll be honest, traveling with Meg isn't exactly a smooth experience. I'm very type A when it comes to travel, preferring to have everything organized and ensuring that we're early for flights. Meg, on the other hand, is the opposite. She's more of a go-with-the-flow type who believes we'll get there when we get there. While I do my best to compromise, this approach doesn't work for me when it comes to flying. Last year, during Parents' Weekend, we planned to fly out to see Jess. Our flight was at 10 a.m., and given that our airport is neither small nor large, I told Meg we needed to be at the airport 90 minutes early. We live about 30 minutes from the airport, so I wanted to leave by 8 a.m. at the latest to allow time for parking and walking. I got up at 6 a.m. to make sure everything was ready, but Meg, who hates getting up early, didn't stir until 7:40 a.m. After waking up, she took her time, showering, making coffee, and even eating a bowl of cereal. She didn't leave the house until 9 a.m. By the time we arrived at the airport, it was busier than usual due to several colleges having parents' weekends. We ended up missing our flight. The airline understandably refused to refund our tickets, so we had to book a new flight for the next day, which meant we missed out on spending Friday afternoon and Saturday morning with Jess. She was understandably disappointed. Fast forward to now, we were flying out for a long weekend to help Jess move into her new apartment. We had a connecting flight, the first leg taking us from our town to a larger city, and from there to Jess's college town. After last year's fiasco, I made sure to emphasize the need to leave extra early this time, and we arrived at the airport on time with a bit of time to spare. However, Meg was annoyed, complaining about having to wait 45 minutes before boarding. The first flight went smoothly, and we landed in our connecting city, a much larger airport with about an hour layover. We got off the plane at 9:15 a.m., and our next flight started boarding at 9:40 a.m. We had to take multiple airport rails to get from where we landed to our new terminal. Once we arrived, we had about 15 minutes until our plane was set to board. At that point, Meg said she wanted to get coffee. There was a nearby market selling hot food and coffee, so I offered to grab some for her. But Meg insisted on getting Starbucks, which was a rail ride away with some walking involved. I told her we didn't have enough time. She was determined to go anyway. Despite my discouragement, she walked off, saying she'd be back in time. 15 minutes passed, and Meg was nowhere to be seen. Boarding started, and our group was called. In a panic, I called her 3 times, but she didn't answer until the last call, when she told me she was still in line at Starbucks. I told her the flight was about to finish boarding, and she needed to hurry. I waited by the gate, but the attendant said they had to shut the gate in 2 minutes. I pleaded with her to wait a little longer, but she insisted they couldn't. With no other choice, I boarded the plane alone. A few minutes later, Meg called to say they wouldn't let her board since they had already removed the boarding ramp. She demanded I tell them to let me off the plane to be with her, but I refused. I told her it wasn't fair to do this to Jess again, reminding her that I had warned her about the time constraints. I advised her to purchase a new ticket for the next flight. I'd see her when she arrived. When Meg finally got to Jess's school, she seemed unbothered by the whole situation and didn't even talk about it. I thought she might have realized it was her fault and wanted to drop it. But I was wrong. Since we returned home, she hasn't spoken to me for over a week, insisting that I'm the one at fault. For context, Meg is generally punctual in other situations like work. It's only when we travel that these issues arise. I've never considered ADHD as a possibility, since she doesn't show other signs, and I don't believe she has any sort of addiction, as some have suggested. One thing I didn't initially mention is that Jess isn't Meg's biological daughter. My first wife tragically passed away due to complications during Jess's birth, and I remarried Meg when Jess was 6. Jess once commented that Meg might not want to visit or help her, which could explain why she's always running late. However, Meg has always been opposed to me visiting Jess alone, so I didn't think this was the case. So, am I the asshole?
Our next story is: my daughter chose her stepdad to walk her down the aisle. A 46-year-old father with a 26-year-old daughter. Her mother walked out on us when she was just 7 years old, disappearing from our lives entirely. It wasn't until my daughter turned 15 that her mom suddenly reappeared, claiming she wanted to rekindle their relationship. Despite everything, my daughter decided to give her mother another chance. Over time, she grew close to her mom's new husband, her stepdad. From what I hear, he's a great guy. They share a love for hockey, and they both play the guitar. At first, I thought it was wonderful that she was finally bonding with her mom and even with this new man in her life. Fast forward to today, my daughter is getting married. She's been with her fiancé, a solid guy, past 4 years. Naturally, both her mother and I have contributed to the wedding. We've each put in over $25,000 to help make her big day perfect. But then, she dropped a bombshell on me. She told me she's chosen her stepdad to walk her down the aisle. She said they've really bonded over the last 11 years. I didn't say anything at the moment, but inside I made a decision. I'm not going to the wedding. I refuse to be disrespected like this. If she wants to play happy family with the mother who abandoned her for 8 years, that's her choice. But I won't be part of it. It wasn't her mother or stepdad who attended every one of her hockey games. It wasn't them who paid for her tutoring so she could pass her exams. It wasn't them who endured the financial strain of working 3 jobs to support us until she was 17. And it sure wasn't them who was there for all her milestones. It was me. I won't tell her I'm not coming. I'll just stay away.
Our next story is, my mother-in-law doesn't let me have sex with my husband. My husband and I got married a year ago. Before our wedding, we didn't live together and rarely saw each other. Both of us were juggling demanding jobs and studies, which left us with limited time for each other. But once we tied the knot, we moved into his apartment, excited to finally start our life together. Unfortunately, just 2 months after our wedding, tragedy struck. My father-in-law died in a sudden accident. My husband, being an only child, was devastated. My mother-in-law was left completely alone. Her grief was overwhelming, and she started suggesting that my husband and I move into her house to keep her company. However, her home is in another state, and uprooting our lives wasn't feasible due to our jobs and college commitments, so she decided to come to us instead. Our apartment has 2 bedrooms, so my mother-in-law moved into the spare room while my husband and I continued sharing the other. While I understood her need for support, things quickly became uncomfortable. See, my mother-in-law never really liked me. She's one of those mothers who believes that no woman is ever good enough for her son. In the beginning, my husband and I were still very much in the honeymoon phase. We were newlyweds, and naturally, our physical relationship was frequent, sometimes even twice a day. But that changed the moment my mother-in-law moved in. Our apartment is small, and with her living there, I felt incredibly self-conscious. It was like having an unwanted third party in our marriage. She feels bad because her head hurts, or things like that. To make matters worse, whenever my husband and I did manage to have some intimate time together, my mother-in-law would magically interrupt us. It didn't matter if it was in the middle of the day or at 3 a.m., she'd find some excuse to knock on our door. She'd ask what we were doing, or say that she wasn't feeling well, complaining of headaches or other minor ailments. It became clear that she was deliberately trying to come between us, and the constant disruptions started to take a toll on our relationship. As if that wasn't enough, her behavior outside the bedroom was just as unbearable. I had no privacy whatsoever. She criticized everything I did, particularly my cooking. Every meal I made was met with disdain, and she never missed an opportunity to make me feel inadequate. My husband, to his credit, tried to defend me, often saying things like, "It's not true, Mom, the food tastes good." But his words did little to ease the tension. The final straw came when she began accusing me of stealing. She claimed that various valuable items and money had gone missing from her room. She pointed the finger squarely at me. The timing was suspicious, as these thefts only occurred on days when I was home alone, usually when I had a day off from work or was studying in the afternoons. I was appalled. I had tried to be understanding and empathetic, allowing her to move in after my father-in-law's death. Accusing me of theft was crossing a line. I finally reached my breaking point. I told my husband that this situation was not what I had signed up for. I had tried to be patient and supportive, understanding her grief and loneliness, but I was not going to tolerate being disrespected and falsely accused. After a particularly heated argument, I packed my bags and went to stay with my parents. Now I'm at a crossroads. My husband has been calling and texting me constantly, begging me to come back home. He's torn between his mother's needs and our marriage, but I'm not sure what to do. I love him, but the stress of living with my mother-in-law has taken a huge toll on me. The thought of returning to that toxic environment is overwhelming, yet I don't want to abandon my marriage either. I'm caught between a rock and a hard place, unsure of how to move forward. All I wanted was to build a happy life with my husband, but the situation has turned our home into anything but.